Welcome, everyone, to the YouTube exclusive version of the PFF Fantasy Podcast IDP edition. I'm Jon Macri, and today I'm going over the top 10 IDP takeaways from preseason week 3, our final look at preseason action, and last chance, really, to get a feel for what these teams' starting lineups might look like come week 1 of the regular season. I've also written up the IDP takeaways from every single preseason game for PFF.com, which I'll link in the episode description for those that want to see beyond the top 10. But honestly, not a ton more on top of what I'll go over today. The main thing you'll want to check out that article for is depth charts for every single team. I've put that together based on what those teams have shown us in this preseason and how I'm kind of picturing them now heading into week 1 of the season. So I think that could be a handy tool, just to reference, especially since some of the more public depth charts might not be paying as much attention to the defensive side of the ball as we are. So again, that's free. It's in the episode description. But let's get into our top 10 takeaways from the past week of preseason games. And we'll start with the linebacker position. Once again, this time it's in Carolina. So this was our first look at both Josey Jewell and Shaq Thompson on the field this preseason. Previously, it had been Clouden Shereless and Trevin Wallace that served as the starters through the first 2 games. And I know I was at least really hoping to get a glimpse of the usage between Jewell and Thompson, since Jewell is new to the team and Thompson missed essentially all of last year with an injury. And Jewell was a player that we talked about in the bounce back episode with Tripp earlier this offseason. And we mentioned that Jewell had familiarity with Panthers defensive coordinator Ejiro Evero from their time together in Denver, where Jewell was a full-time player and had the best season of his career. And that was back in 2022. Well, that familiarity appears to have paid off because Josey Jewell was wearing the green dot over Shaq Thompson, who's been on the Panthers his entire career, which to me is great news for Jewell because it means that in situations where they may go with a one linebacker look, he's the safe bet to be that one linebacker on the field and not lose snaps. Now, both Jewell and Thompson played 100% through the first 15 snaps of the game, that first drive there. So there wasn't any kind of clear indication that they will have a lot of sub packages or anything like that. But it's also the preseason where not a lot of teams are showing those kinds of tendencies. And actually, I will say, like back in preseason week 1, we did see them rotate Trevin Wallace off once on each of the first 2 obvious passing downs in that game, which should be at least viewed as maybe a little bit of a hint, as they might do something similar in the regular season to get more DBs out there or more pass rushers, however they want to see it. But that would potentially lower Thompson's value a little bit more. But Josey Jewell looks safe and in a great spot for that bounce back season that we were looking for. So really encouraging stuff there for Josey Jewell specifically. Okay, let's do a quick update on the Bills linebacker situation from last week, because I think this was one of the more interesting developments from preseason week 2. I believe we at least got some more clarity this week. Obviously, last week, a new linebacker appeared in the form of Joe Andreessen, who wore the dot. He started the game next to Dorian Williams, which, came at a time when we were trying to get more insight into who will replace Matt Milano after his injury. Well, I think that was a lot clearer this week because Dorian Williams was getting the starters rest treatment by not playing in this game with the rest of the backups, right? So Joe Andreessen did play in this game. He also wore the dot again, but to me, this was the team at least signaling that he'll at least have maybe a shot to make the 53, but not necessarily start week 1, right? So Andreessen started next to Deion Jones. Deion Jones was cut yesterday, I believe. But even then, Jones came out of the game first, while Andreessen stayed in there with more of the backups who are likely to be in consideration as depth pieces. We saw him stay in the game later when Dorian Williams came out last week as well, which was another potential hint that Dorian Williams would be the starter as the LB2 there next to Matt Milano, or next to Terrell Bernard, which I think made the most sense. But Andreessen was at least an interesting name because of him wearing the dot and starting that game, coming out of seemingly nowhere. But to me, it's Terrell Bernard, it's Dorian Williams that I'm expecting to lead this team in linebacker snaps to start the year. Whether or not Williams will be in a full-time role remains to be seen, but at the very least, I feel comfortable about him being the LB2 there right now, and I think we can eliminate Andreessen from the starting linebacker conversation for now based on that preseason usage. Okay, one of the other linebacker situations from last week that I think is worth updating is in Baltimore, because we actually saw pretty much the exact same thing as we did in preseason week 2 with no Roquan Smith in the lineup. It was Malik Harrison and Trenton Simpson who got the start, with Harrison wearing the dot as he did last week. Harrison also got the first starter's rest treatment again, while Simpson stayed in the game with the backups basically. Now, to me, there's a number of ways to kind of look at this, and really all of them, at least to me, point to not starting Trenton Simpson in week 1 in IDP if I can afford to, right? So the most optimistic way of looking at it for Simpson is that he won't be wearing the dot next to Roquan anyways. So not, that's why he wasn't wearing it in the preseason. And the team kind of knows what they have in Malik Harrison. So they're fine to take him out first and give Simpson more basically practice reps so that he's ready for week 1. That is very possible. And I'm still treating Trenton Simpson as the LB2 there for now because of those reasons. And I think it's the most likely situation. However, it's also possible that even with the starting role, Simpson might not be a full-time player. We haven't seen all 3 safeties in the lineup this preseason. So that's Kyle Hamilton, Marcus Williams, Eddie Jackson. And this is a team with a history of dime personnel usage who may want to go with more of that this season, considering the inexperience of Simpson in the NFL. That, to me, that makes sense. Like, it's something more NFL teams are doing anyway. So I'm at least cautioning there, even if Simpson is the expected starter, right? Now, I guess the more pessimistic way of looking at it is that the team is more comfortable with Harrison as the starter, hence why they're resting him, giving him those play calling duties here early, and want him to be, safe and ready for week 1. That wouldn't be a surprise either in how many times we see NFL teams lean on the veterans over inexperienced players, of which Simpson definitely qualifies, right, for having played fewer than 50 defensive snaps last season as a rookie. So all of this in mind, we can still draft Simpson as Baltimore's LB2 at a reasonable price. But when it comes to week 1 lineup decisions, I'd at least be sitting him if I can, find safer options at the position who we know are getting full-time roles. If it turns out, that he's full-time LB2 there next to Roquan, then great, start him with confidence in week 2. But there's no need to risk it in week 1, I guess, is what I'm getting at here. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, we got another starting linebacker duo to look at from this past weekend, this time in Tennessee. It was Kenneth Murray and Jack Gibbens. Murray wore the dot as he did in preseason week 1. They both played the full first quarter together. And just like in the previous game, both players were 100% snap linebackers. Now, this is a new defensive coordinator in Denard Wilson, so we haven't seen any true play calling tendencies from him in the regular season, for example. And like I mentioned earlier, just because a team plays 2 full-time linebackers in the preseason necessarily mean do it in the regular season, right? You hear a lot about vanilla defenses in the preseason, and a lot of the time this is kind of what that looks like. So Murray is definitely the safe bet for snaps here, given that he's wearing the green dot, and I at least feel somewhat better about Gibbens, at least playing a higher snap share than he did last year on a weekly basis under Shane Bowen at the time. So that role was often less than 65% of snaps on a weekly basis, so not good for IDP. Now, something to keep in mind here is that we also haven't seen how the team is going to utilize their safeties either. Much like with Baltimore, they at least have some capable options where it appears Amani Hooker and Quandre Diggs will start, but Elijah Molden, Jamal Adams could be factoring in there in certain situations. Now, Jamal Adams definitely feeling more like a package option these days, and maybe that's how they plan on using him. I'm not 100% sure. We didn't see him in the preseason, but either way, that usage could come at the cost of a linebacker, which would likely be Gibbons, right? So again, another situation where I'm fine drafting Gibbons as the expected LB2 in Tennessee, but might not be starting him right away in week 1 until we see what this full starting defense kind of looks like. Okay, one more linebacker situation to look at, the Los Angeles Chargers. No starters in this game for the Chargers at any position, which, as we highlighted last week, pretty much locks Denzel Perriman and Diane Henley into the starting roles there, Perriman being the green dot LB1. But The reason I included them here is because we finally got a look at rookie linebacker Junior Colson for the first time this preseason. Now, coming out of the draft, I and many other IDP folks felt pretty comfortable in Colson being a year one starter, considering his draft capital and familiarity with Jim Harbaugh and defensive coordinator Jesse Minter. But he missed a bunch of practice time in camp, right? He had to have that appendix surgery, which pushed him down the depth chart. Nothing we can really do about that. But playing him in this game pretty much confirms that he's the LB3 at best right now. He started the game, he wore the dot, did have to come off the field at some point during the second drive. Not exactly sure what happened there, but came back on for the third drive, and then his night was done after that. And guys like Shane Lee and Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste finished out most of the rest of the game. So just important not to treat Colson as a starting option come week one. I would not be drafting him in most redraft formats right now because we don't know if/when he will get a starting spot again. So at least should be viewed as like a potential future waiver target in redraft, if that. But for those dynasty rosters who did spend rookie picks on him, make sure he's on your bench come week one. Hey everyone, we're just going to take a quick break to let you know that this episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. In today's hectic world, it's easy to focus on everything except yourself and your own mental health. Sometimes you need a little help to help make sure that stays on track as well. Therapy can be really useful to get a better understanding of how your mind actually works and to become more aware of your own patterns of behavior and how to improve them. It's useful for everybody, not just people struggling with something specific. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is a convenient, flexible, and entirely online way to get therapy that's right for you. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you could switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/PFFfantasy today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/PFFfantasy. Okay, some safeties now. Some of these are going to be for those like deeper leagues, but I at least found some interesting usage that shifts around some of the expected depth charts at the position for week one. Starting with the Jacksonville Jaguars, last year it was Andre Sisco and Rayshon Jenkins as the starting safeties, and we got some pretty good IDP usage out of Jenkins, but he's gone to Seattle now, and there's a need for a potential replacement. Darnell Savage was brought in this offseason, who's been a pretty poor IDP. He's an awful tackler. And then the other job for that second position is second-year, fifth-round pick Antonio Johnson. And based on the usage from this preseason game, where we finally saw all three of those safeties together at the same time, it appears that Johnson is going to be the favorite to start in that previous Jenkins spot. Now, keeping in mind, this is a different defensive coordinator this year, so it's not necessarily copy and pasting alignment data or anything there, but at least the second starting safety role looks to be in favor of Antonio Johnson. We saw Sisco and Johnson as the full-time safeties in this game with the starters, while Darnell Savage also got the start, but played primarily in the slot for 90% of his snaps. The issue with that is that it was not a full-time role, right? So just 74% of the possible snaps with the starters for Savage through the first half, right? He definitely played with the starters, but again, not a full-time role, so it's going to be a deep league option only. Antonio Johnson played more closer to the line of scrimmage, but it wasn't like a significant advantage either way. So main takeaway here, I guess, is that Darnell Savage should be a deep league only target, while Sisco and Johnson are our primary IDP targets in drafts right now. Okay, a couple more safety takeaways that affect depth charts here, with the next one being in New Orleans. Now, obviously, Tyrann Mathieu, he's locked into a starting spot, and I think a lot of people have just kind of consistently assumed that it would be Jordan Howden starting next to him, but that at least seems to have changed this preseason because Will Harris has worked his way up the depth chart here in recent weeks. Originally back in the first preseason game, Harris didn't start next to Mathieu. Neither did Howden. It was Jonathan Abram who got the start and played the first quarter with Mathieu as a starter. Howden and Harris didn't come in the game until the second quarter. Then in the second preseason game, it was Will Harris and Tyrann Mathieu who were the starters, playing about 4 drives together, with Abram only coming on for third and long situations, so a sub-package role for him. and it wasn't to replace either safety. Then Howden came in the game later once Matthew and Harris were essentially done with their day. So this week, Tyrann Mathieu did not play at all, but we seem to at least get some clarity, with what we're looking for, at least for who will start next to Tyrann Mathieu, and especially combined with some of that usage from last week as well. And that was Will Harris started again along with Jordan Howden. But it was Harris whose day was done at the end of the first quarter, even though it was mid-drive. It at least seemed to be a clear plan by the coaching staff to only play him for the first quarter, not risk injury to their starter. So Jordan Howden stayed in the game for the entirety of the first half, along with Jonathan Abrams. So we're going to treat those two as the backups. And Will Harris at least now becomes a name of interest in those deeper leagues for people looking for a starting safety. Last safety situation in Indianapolis, just to kind of update what we've been looking at this preseason. And since we know how valuable that strong safety role in Gus Bradley's defense can be for IDP, there are a lot of box snaps up for grabs there. So we know that with the team releasing Ronnie Harrison yesterday or the day before, that's just another confirmation that it'll be Julian Blackmon and Nick Cross as the starters for the position. This is what they showed us in the first preseason game. Blackmon didn't play in the second preseason game. And then this week, it was Blackmon and Cross getting the start with Rodney Thomas and Ronnie Harrison as the backups. Now, Julian Blackmon still at least appears to be the safest bet for those box snaps this season, despite reports of him playing more deep in camp and making it seem like that would be his primary role. I think Blackmon is a pretty safe bet to get those box snaps again this year, even if Nick Cross saw slightly more than what like a Rodney Thomas would have last year. It was pretty clear Blackmon getting the IDP friendly usage, 44% of his snaps being played in the box, and then adding in some slot snaps and one on the edge as well. So Blackmon getting the majority of those box snaps makes him another nice value in IDP drafts this year, for those looking to get scoop up some safeties later in drafts. There should be a lot of box snaps there for Julian Blackmon. Okay, how about some cornerback news for you true sickos who are interested in this kind of stuff, either for CB required leagues or deeper DB leagues? But we just found out that last year's pick 6 king, Deron Bland, requires like a foot surgery. That's expected to sideline him 6 to 8 weeks. The Cowboys outside corners, like 2 years in a row, have been amazing for fantasy. It was Trayvon Diggs with all the picks in 2022, and then Deron Bland, obviously, with those pick 6s last year. So I know a lot of people are going to want to go after that position again. And it seems like 5th-round rookie out of Wake Forest, Kalen Carson, has potentially played himself into being the next man up. Now, it's not a guarantee, but for those like deeper CB required leagues, he'd at least be the main name that I'd be looking at based on word around camp and stuff like that. So Carson has seemingly played well in camp, and for a team without many great backup options, he's looking like the front runner to replace Deron Bland, at least come week 1. So that's who I've scooped up in those deeper formats for myself, and should absolutely be out there on like 99.9% of waiver wires if you're looking to do the same, at least until Deron Bland gets back into the lineup. Okay, last one for today. Let's talk about the Eagles corners, which includes one of the most hyped, potentially overhyped rookies for IDP this offseason. It's Cooper DeJean of the Philadelphia Eagles, an exciting player out of Iowa with, kick return potential, but where he fit among the starting defense has always kind of been the key to figure out first and foremost. And it doesn't appear that he will be a week 1 starter with the team. He played his first preseason action this weekend, playing almost the entire game and playing exclusively in the slot, which also wasn't a full-time role. He played 75% of the possible snaps with the starters or with, the primary defense when it was on the field, rotating off a little bit, and 96% of those snaps coming in the slot. So the Eagles starting corner and safety lineups at least appear to be set at the moment. It's Reed Blankenship and CJ Gardner-Johnson at safety, and then Darius Slay and Isaiah Rodgers at outside corner, with rookie first-round pick Quinyon Mitchell playing the slot. So Mitchell has been out there with the starters, playing both outside corner and in the slot. So the expectation would be that, maybe Isaiah Rodgers comes off the field when they're utilizing 2 corners, or Mitchell comes off the field when they're utilizing 2 corners. One of those two, where Darius Slay would stay on the field. And that's kind of what we've seen this preseason. I've only pulled the starting snaps for Quinyon Mitchell. He's stayed in a little bit longer with some of the backups as well. But you can see most of his usage is coming in the slot there, and a lot of that usage was with the starters. So that's the way I'm kind of looking at it. Mitchell's, Rogers, and Slay being the starting corners. Not sure if Mitchell will be full time with Slay back in the lineup. I doubt it. But again, for those deeper CB required leagues, Mitchell at least becomes more interesting than a Cooper Dijon for now. Again, I hope you all found that helpful as we wrap up the preseason. Reminder that I have the free article version of this where I look at every game, not just the top 10 IDP takeaways, which is linked in the episode description as well. And those depth charts are in there as well, which is important. So we're going to be doing something similar every single week in the regular season as well, where I'll be recording like key IDP takeaways / waiver wire targets on Sunday night. That'll most likely go out Monday for the YouTube crowd. So again, please make sure you're subscribed. It helps me a ton in knowing that you guys are interested in this information and will be hungry for it all season long. You guys, as the IDP crowd, have been incredibly supportive already, though, and I appreciate you all, which is why I have decided to keep those weekly recaps into the regular season and include waiver wire targets and stuff like that. So stay tuned for all of that. I'll also be recording Dark Horse IDPs with the legendary Adam Markham later this week, which is going to be a lot of fun. So until then, peace out.